Your Christmas tree is technically a bathroom appliance, your favorite carol is about illegal drag racing, and the original greeting cards featured dead birds. Welcome to the side of the holidays that schools definitely don't teach. We are counting down 33 of the most unhinged, illegal, and downright bizarre facts in Christmas history that prove our ancestors were absolutely out of their minds. Let's ruin some childhood memories. 1. You might need to sit down for this one because your beloved artificial Christmas tree has a genuinely dirty origin story that most people conveniently ignore. The very first mass-produced fake trees were not created by some festive decoration genius, but by the Addis Brush Company in the 1930s, a manufacturer famous for making heavy-duty toilet scrubbers. They realized they had a massive surplus of stiff animal hair bristles and green dye, so they simply fed the materials into the exact same machines they used to make toilet brushes, dyed them green, and twisted them into a cone shape. They marketed them as the silver pine to make them sound fancy. But in reality, that vintage tree your grandmother cherishes is technically a giant festive bathroom appliance designed to scrub porcelain. It is arguably the most successful marketing scam in the history of home decor, and a very weird thing to put your presents under. 2. If you think getting a lump of coal in your stocking is a harsh punishment, you clearly haven't met the Icelandic holiday monster known as Jólakötturinn, or the Yule Cat. This isn't a cute, fluffy kitten that knocks over ornaments. It is a gigantic, bloodthirsty beast towering over houses that prowls the snowy countryside on Christmas Eve with a very specific dietary requirement. The legend says this monster eats anyone who has not received new clothes for Christmas, acting as the most aggressive and lethal fashion police in history. It was actually a terrifying psychological weapon invented by medieval farmers to scare their workers into processing the autumn wool harvest faster before the holidays. So if you were lazy and didn't finish your spinning work, you didn't get a new shirt, and therefore, you became cat food for a giant feline with absolutely zero patience for your wardrobe malfunction. 3. We usually think of church services as solemn, quiet, and respectful affairs, but in medieval France and Spain, they celebrated something called the Feast of the Ass, which is exactly as chaotic as it sounds. This was an official celebration honoring the donkey that carried Mary to Bethlehem, but the ceremony itself got incredibly unhinged because they would actually march a live donkey right up to the altar in the middle of the church. During the Mass, the priest was required to bray a loud hee-haw at the congregation, instead of saying the usual prayers. And the best part is that the entire congregation would scream hee-haw back at him in a holy braying contest instead of saying Amen. The church leadership eventually banned it because, surprisingly, having a confused farm animal as the guest of honor and screaming like donkeys sends the wrong message to the believers. 4. Nothing says romance like puckering up under a parasitic plant named after poop, because the word mistletoe is actually derived from two Anglo-Saxon words, mistle meaning dung and tan meaning twig. This is because ancient people noticed that mistletoe would suddenly sprout on tree branches exactly where birds had left their droppings, since the plant spreads exclusively through sticky seeds that have passed through a bird's digestive system and landed on a branch. So, when you are trying to steal a romantic kiss at a Christmas party, just remember that you are standing underneath a biological monument to avian excrement that is slowly strangling the tree it is attached to. Suddenly, the holiday magic feels a little less enchanting and a lot more sanitary. So maybe just stick to a firm handshake or a friendly wave next time you see that green bundle hanging from the ceiling. 5. In 1826, the cadets at the prestigious West Point Military Academy were told that alcohol was banned for the Christmas party, which turned out to be a massive tactical error by the administration that underestimated the students' desire to party. The cadets smuggled gallons of whiskey into the North Barracks to make supercharged eggnog, resulting in the infamous eggnog riot. It was absolute chaos involving sword fights, smashed windows, pistol shots fired in the hallways, and knockout brawls with superior officers who tried to stop the drunken festivities. By the morning, a third of the cadets were implicated in the mutiny, including a young Jefferson Davis, who would later become the president of the Confederacy. It turns out nothing threatens national security quite like depriving armed college kids of their holiday booze and expecting them to just go to sleep quietly. 6. If you think modern Christmas cards are boring or generic, you should see what the Victorians were sending, because their idea of holiday cheer was absolute nightmare fuel that would terrify a modern child. A very popular and baffling design in the 19th century featured a dead robin lying on its back with its feet stiff in the air, sometimes accompanied by the cheerful caption, "May yours be a joyful Christmas." Some historians think it was a dark joke about the death of the old year, or perhaps a play on words since British postmen were nicknamed robins due to their red uniforms. But either way, it is incredibly grim. Nothing says happy holidays quite like a stiff, frozen bird corpse delivered by the postman, proving that the Victorians were the original goth teenagers who were obsessed with death even during the happiest time of the year. 7. We complain about the war on Christmas today, but in the 17th century it was a literal war because Oliver Cromwell and his Puritan government decided that Christmas was too fun and therefore illegal. They viewed the feasting, drinking, and decorating as heathen, pagan disgraces that distracted from serious worship, so Parliament actually passed a law banning the holiday completely for over a decade. Soldiers patrolled the streets of London, physically seizing roast beef from citizens and arresting anyone caught cooking a festive meal or singing a carol. It was a total lockdown on joy where, if you were caught eating a mince pie, you were considered an enemy of the state. It just goes to show that politicians ruining everything is a time-honored tradition that goes back hundreds of years, and nobody was safe from the fun police during the 1650s. 8. If you thought receiving a pair of socks was a bad gift, try living in medieval England where they celebrated a delightful tradition on December 28th, known as Childermas or Beating Day. On this morning, parents would drag their children out of bed and actually beat them with sticks to remind them of the suffering of the innocent children killed by King Herod in the biblical story. The twisted logic was that the physical pain would help the religious lessons stick in their memory, and bringing this bad luck upon them early would secure good luck for the rest of the year. It brings a whole new meaning to tough love, when your parents wake you up with a physical assault just to provide some aggressive religious context for the holidays, but hey, at least you didn't have to go to school and do homework that day. 9. You have probably hummed Jingle Bells 1,000 times, but you are living a lie because this song was never intended for Christmas at all. It was actually written in 1857 by James Lord Pierpont for a Thanksgiving church service, and the original lyrics were surprisingly scandalous for the time. The song, originally titled One Horse Open Sleigh, wasn't about family gatherings or Santa Claus. It was essentially about 19th century drag racing in the snow and trying to pick up girls while showing off your fast sleigh. The lyrics describe high-speed crashes and mocking people for driving slow horses, which basically makes it the Fast and Furious of the Victorian era. It only became associated with Christmas decades later because the melody was so catchy that people refused to stop singing it after Thanksgiving was over, proving that catchy tunes care absolutely nothing about calendar logic. 10. Coronations are supposed to be happy events, but when William the Conqueror was crowned King of England on Christmas Day in 1066, it turned into a literal inferno due to a massive language barrier. When the English nobles inside Westminster Abbey shouted their approval for the new king, the Norman guards stationed outside, who didn't speak a word of English, mistook the loud cheering for an assassination attempt or a riot. In a complete panic, instead of running inside to check, the guards decided the best tactical response was to set fire to all the houses surrounding the abbey. The congregation inside rushed out into a smoke-filled chaos of burning buildings and looting soldiers, meaning William's reign started with the distinct smell of ashes, terrified subjects, and one of the worst misunderstandings in military history. 11. Modern health and safety regulations would have a heart attack over the traditional Christmas pudding, because for centuries, it was standard practice to bake a solid piece of metal directly into the food. Families would hide a silver sixpence or a thimble inside the dense cake batter, and tradition dictated that whoever found the object in their slice would receive wealth and good luck for the coming year. However, in reality, this was less about good fortune and more about the very real risk of chipping a molar or choking to death at the dinner table. It turns out that putting small, hard metal objects into a dessert that people eat while intoxicated is a recipe for a dental emergency. But apparently, the potential for future riches was worth the immediate risk of internal injury. 12. If you traveled back in time to meet Santa Claus 150 years ago, you probably wouldn't recognize him because he looked less like a jolly Coca-Cola mascot and more like a wizard from a fantasy novel. Before the modern image was standardized in the 20th century, Father Christmas was typically depicted wearing green, brown, or even blue robes to symbolize the coming of spring and the ancient spirit of nature. He was much leaner and often looked a bit sterner than the chubby gift giver we know today. While it is a myth that Coca-Cola completely invented the red suit, their massive marketing campaigns definitely helped kill off the green version, effectively rebranding an ancient folklore figure into the color scheme of a soda can for the rest of eternity. 13. We have to thank a desperate church choir master in Cologne, Germany, for the invention of candy canes because they were originally created as a tool to shut children up. Back in 1670, the choir master was sick and tired of the children being noisy and restless during the long, boring Christmas Eve nativity services. He asked a local candy maker to create white sugar sticks to keep their mouths busy. But to justify giving candy in church, he asked for them to be bent at the top to resemble a shepherd's crook. This clever marketing spin made the candy technically religious, allowing him to pacify a room full of screaming toddlers with pure sugar while pretending it was a devout teaching moment about the shepherds visiting baby Jesus. 14. If you think your office Christmas party gets wild, it has nothing on the ancient Roman festival of Saturnalia, which is the direct ancestor of many of our modern holiday traditions. Held in mid-December, this week-long festival was basically the purge, but with more wine and gambling. It was a time of complete chaos where social norms were overturned. Masters would serve dinner to their slaves, gambling was suddenly legal for everyone, and people ran through the streets screaming and drinking. The early church realized they could never stop people from partying this hard, so instead of canceling it, they strategically placed Christmas right in the middle of it to co-opt the celebration. They essentially took a pagan frat party and rebranded it with a holy title to make the conversion process easier. 15. You probably wouldn't want a slice of the original Christmas pudding because, until fairly recently, it wasn't a dessert at all, but a savory nightmare designed for survival. In the 14th century, it was a porridge-like soup called frumenti, made by boiling beef and mutton with raisins, wines, and spices. It wasn't baked as a cake, but was more of a thick, meat-heavy sludge that could be preserved for months during the winter. The idea was to pack as many calories and preservatives as possible into one dish to keep people from starving. Over time, the meat was slowly replaced by sweat and sugar. But just remember that your sweet holiday treat started its life as a preserved meat smoothie that would likely make a modern person instantly vomit. 16. Teddy Roosevelt might have been known as a rough-riding outdoorsman, but he was also a hardcore conservationist who actually banned Christmas trees from the White House during his presidency. He believed that cutting down trees for mere decoration was a wasteful destruction of forests, so he forbade his family from having one. However, his young son Archie was not about to let his father's environmental politics ruin his holiday. Archie smuggled a small tree into the White House, hid it in a sewing closet, and decorated it in secret. When he finally revealed it to his father on Christmas morning, the president was reportedly amused rather than angry, proving that even the most powerful man in the country can't stop the determination of a kid who wants a place to put his presents. 17. You might think that serious astronauts have absolutely no time for childish games, but the very first song ever played in space was the result of a massive, heart-stopping prank pulled by the crew of Gemini 6 in 1965. Before they played the tune, astronauts Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford sent a panicked, dead-serious report to Mission Control, claiming they saw a UFO with a pilot wearing a red suit orbiting the pole on a collision course. As tension reached a breaking point in Houston, the astronauts suddenly whipped out a tiny smuggled harmonica and a set of miniature bells to play a shaky version of Jingle Bells. It was a moment of pure comedic genius, proving that even when you are floating in a tin can thousands of miles above the Earth, there is always time to terrify your bosses with a fake alien invasion just to set up a Christmas musical number. 18. If you feel the overwhelming need to deep clean your house before the holidays, you should look to Guatemala, where they take the concept of spring cleaning to a pyromaniacal level with a tradition called the burning of the devil. Every year on December 7th, people drag all their household garbage, old furniture, and useless junk into the streets to create massive piles of trash, and then they place an effigy of the devil on top of the heap. At exactly 6 in the evening, they set the entire thing on fire in a massive citywide bonfire to cleanse their homes of bad vibes and evil spirits before Christmas. It is a spectacular, smoky, and slightly dangerous way to start the season, basically confirming that the best way to deal with your problems and your clutter is to simply light them on fire and watch them burn to ash. 19. We usually think of sending Christmas cards as a thoughtful and sentimental gesture, but the entire billion-dollar tradition was actually invented because a wealthy Victorian man was simply too lazy to write personal letters to his friends. In 1843, civil servant Sir Henry Cole realized he had way too many acquaintances and simply couldn't be bothered to handwrite a polite response to every holiday greeting he received. Instead of sucking it up, he hired an artist to draw a festive scene, printed 1,000 copies with a generic greeting, and mailed them out to everyone he knew to save time. So, the massive greeting card industry exists solely because one rich British guy wanted to automate his friendship duties and avoid the hassle of actually talking to people, proving that laziness is the true mother of invention. 20. You have probably heard of cockfighting, but in 19th century Britain, the holiday thirst for blood sports was so intense that they actually organized goose fighting tournaments in local pubs. Geese are naturally aggressive, territorial, and terrifying creatures, so pub owners would clear the floor, place 2 angry birds in a makeshift ring, and take bets on which one would dominate the other in a flurry of feathers and honking. It was considered a prime form of Christmas entertainment for the working class who wanted to gamble their wages away while watching farm animals assault each other. Fortunately, this brutal tradition eventually died out, likely because people realized that getting hissed at by a goose is terrifying enough without making it an organized spectator sport. But it shows just how bored people were before television. 21. Millions of Americans hang a glass pickle ornament on their Christmas tree every year, firmly believing it is an old-world German tradition known as the Weihnachtsgurke. The story goes that the child who finds the hidden pickle gets an extra present. But if you ask an actual German about this, they will look at you like you are insane because they have never heard of it. The whole thing was actually a clever marketing lie concocted by department stores like Woolworths in the late 19th century to sell imported glass vegetables that nobody wanted to buy. It is the ultimate testament to American consumerism that we invented a fake foreign heritage just to justify hanging a glass cucumber next to the tinsel. And now we defend it as if it were ancient history. 22. Christopher Columbus is famous for discovering the New World, but most people forget that he was also a terrible captain who crashed his flagship, the Santa Maria, on Christmas Eve in 1492. After days of partying and drinking to celebrate the holiday, the entire experienced crew decided to go to sleep, leaving the ship's wheel in the hands of an untrained cabin boy. Naturally, the boy immediately steered the ship onto a coral reef off the coast of modern-day Haiti, completely destroying the vessel beyond repair. Columbus was forced to abandon the ship and use its timber to build a fort called La Navidad, which means the very first Christmas celebrated by Europeans in the Americas was actually a drunken shipwreck caused by a designated driver who didn't know how to drive. 23. If you think the current war on Christmas is intense, you should have visited Boston in 1659, where the Pilgrims decided that celebrating the holiday was a criminal offense punishable by a fine. The Puritans who settled in Massachusetts were so obsessed with religious strictness that they viewed the feasting and partying of Christmas as a satanic practice with no basis in the Bible. They issued a public notice stating that anyone found observing the holiday by not working, feasting, or skipping church would be fined 5 shillings, which was a significant amount of money at the time. For 22 years, the land of the free was actually the land where you could go broke just for trying to eat a mince pie or wish your neighbor a happy holiday, because fun was apparently a sin. 24. In the Middle Ages, social hierarchy was everything, but during Christmas, they flipped the script with a bizarre tradition involving the appointment of a Lord of Misrule. This was usually a peasant or a low-ranking member of the household who was crowned as a mock king for the duration of the festivities and given absolute power to command the real nobility. the Lord of Misrule would order the masters to serve the servants, demand ridiculous pranks, and generally orchestrate a festival of drunken chaos without fear of punishment. It served as a social safety valve, allowing the oppressed lower classes to let off steam by humiliating their bosses for a few days, proving that everyone deep down enjoys seeing their manager forced to act like a fool for the sake of a party. 25. If you are American, you might think Boxing Day involves Mike Tyson or a clearance sale fight, but it actually has nothing to do with fighting and everything to do with social class. In Britain, servants were required to work on Christmas Day to serve their masters elaborate dinners, meaning they couldn't see their own families. The next day, the guilt-ridden masters would give them a day off and hand them a Christmas box, containing leftovers, small gifts, and occasionally a bonus coin. So this holiday essentially started as a way for rich people to offload their old turkey and stale pudding onto their employees while patting themselves on the back for their generosity. It is basically a national holiday dedicated to the concept of the re-gifting of scraps from the rich man's table. 26. The Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center is now a worldwide symbol of holiday luxury and glamour. But the very first tree erected there in 1931 was a pathetic, muddy symbol of desperation. It was put up by construction workers who were building the center during the height of the Great Depression, and they didn't have money for glass ornaments or twinkling lights. Instead, they decorated a small balsam fir with strings of cranberries, paper garlands made by their families, and literal garbage like tin cans and the foil wrappers from blasting caps. They lined up beneath this sad little tree to receive their paychecks, standing in the mud, which makes the modern tradition of million-dollar lighting ceremonies feel a bit ironic compared to its gritty, blue-collar roots. 27. We assume Christmas is the foundational Christian tradition, but if you traveled back to the early days of the church, you would find that the first Christians absolutely hated the idea of celebrating birthdays. Early theologians like Origen argued that celebrating the birth of a deity was a disgusting pagan custom, usually reserved for tyrants like Pharaoh or King Herod. For the first few centuries, the church focused entirely on the dates of martyrdom, viewing the day of death as the true birth into heaven. If you had wished an early Christian a happy birthday for Jesus, they would have likely looked at you as a heretic and scolded you for acting like a pagan Roman, proving that the church was originally the ultimate party pooper. 28. We usually think of gingerbread men as cute, harmless cookies, but they were actually invented by Queen Elizabeth I as a bizarre form of edible diplomacy and political satire. The Virgin Queen instructed her royal bakers to create gingerbread figures that were caricatures of visiting foreign dignitaries and the suitors she was flirting with. It was a massive power move to present a powerful duke or a rival ambassador with a cookie that looked exactly like him, only to bite its head off in front of the entire court. It was essentially voodoo doll diplomacy where you could flatter your guests and threaten to destroy them at the exact same time, all while enjoying a delicious ginger spice snack. 29. You might assume that a conservative place like the American heartland would have been celebrating Christmas since the beginning of time, but Oklahoma was actually the Grinch of the United States. It was the very last state to recognize Christmas as a legal holiday, and they didn't get around to doing it until 1907. Even though the holiday had been federal law since 1870, the territory was slow to adopt the formal celebration, partly due to the lingering Puritan influence that viewed the holiday as frivolous. It is hilarious to think that while the rest of the country was singing carols and opening presents, Oklahoma was holding out for decades, effectively being the final boss that Santa Claus had to defeat to conquer America. 30. Fidel Castro might be known for cigars and revolution, but in 1969, he became the man who stole Christmas from an entire island nation. The Cuban government officially banned the holiday, not just for religious reasons, but because Castro decided it was a massive distraction from the sugar harvest. He wanted every able-bodied person in the fields cutting cane to reach a 10 million ton quota, so he declared that Christmas festivities were interfering with the revolution's economic goals. The ban was strictly enforced, and the holiday effectively disappeared from the public calendar for nearly 30 years. It wasn't until Pope John Paul II visited Cuba in 1998 that Castro finally allowed the decorations to come back out, proving that even dictators eventually bow to peer pressure. 31. Before the late 19th century, putting lights on a Christmas tree was a suicidal activity because people literally glued burning wax candles to dry pine branches inside their wooden houses. The result was exactly what you would expect, and families had to keep buckets of water and sand next to the tree to put out the inevitable infernos. It wasn't until 1882 that Edward Johnson, a partner of Thomas Edison, hand-wired 80 red, white, and blue light bulbs around a tree in New York. It was a publicity stunt to prove electricity was safe, but people were initially terrified that the electric lights would explode or electrocute them. Johnson basically saved Christmas from being the leading cause of house fires, transforming a death trap into a glowing masterpiece. 32. By the early 1800s, Christmas was actually dying out in Britain and America, considered a minor religious day that was barely celebrated by the working class who were too busy surviving the Industrial Revolution. It took Charles Dickens writing A Christmas Carol in 1843 to single-handedly save the holiday from extinction. Dickens didn't just write a ghost story, he effectively invented the modern spirit of Christmas, focusing on charity, family, and turkey dinners rather than just church services. The book was such a massive cultural phenomenon that it guilt-tripped the wealthy Victorian class into being generous and practically forced the revival of the holiday. Without Scrooge and his three ghosts, we might treat December 25th like just another Tuesday. 33. You might think the idea of enemies pausing a global war to play soccer is a cheesy Hollywood myth. But in 1914, the Christmas truce actually happened, and it remains the most surreal moment in military history. On the frozen battlefields of World War I, amidst the mud and machine gun fire, German soldiers suddenly started singing Silent Night and holding up small Christmas trees above the trenches. Instead of shooting them, the British soldiers sang back, and slowly, thousands of men defied direct orders and climbed out into no man's land. They exchanged cigarettes, shared pudding, and literally played soccer games on the exact ground where they had been killing each other hours before. It was a spontaneous outbreak of humanity that absolutely terrified the generals, who immediately ordered heavy artillery barrages the next day to ensure the soldiers remembered they were supposed to hate each other, proving that peace is the only thing the military fears more than the enemy. We just covered 33 reasons why history was a fever dream, but I know the internet is a darker place than any history book. So I am challenging you in the comments. What is a disturbing or obscure holiday fact that was actually too dark or too weird, even for this list? I want to see if you can shock me. Subscribe right now if you want to keep destroying your ignorance, and like this video if you are grateful you aren't eating a preserved meat smoothie for dinner.